Welcome back and welcome to part 2 of this 2-part tutorial series where we're creating these glowing mushrooms in Blender Eevee. So in this part we're going to be finishing up the whole scene, so we'll do the lighting and the environment, and we'll also add the ground and duplicate the mushrooms and render the final image. If you'd like to purchase the project files and also help support this channel, then you can get that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Links are in the description. And all of your support really does help me to keep creating Blender tutorials and content. And also, if you enjoy creating these little mushroom artworks in Blender, then after this video you might be interested in checking out my magical mushrooms tutorial series. So I have another mushroom tutorial series, and it's how to create these magical mushrooms right here, and we also create some little floating orbs, and we actually render out an animation. So links will be in the description to that free tutorial on my YouTube channel. So I'm going to click right back over here to go to the layout, and I now want to add a camera. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go down here and we're going to add a camera. And then I'm going to move my view to wherever I want the camera to be, so somewhere about here. And then I can press Control Alt Numpad 0, and that is going to bring the camera to where we are. Now I want this to be a square image, so what I'm going to do is click right up here to go to the output properties, and I am going to change the X and Y resolution to 2560 by 2560. I want a nice large square image, so that's what I'm going to use. You could also just use 1920 by 1920 or 1080 by 1080. And then I'm going to click right back over here to go to the object data properties with the camera selected. And you can see that there is a focal length right here on the camera. So I want to change this focal length up to like 100. I think 100 looks better because it'll make everything look a little bit more flat and zoom everything in a bit. So now I need to move the camera around, so I can press G to grab with the camera selected. That'll move it around. I can also press G to grab, and then I can tap the Z key twice, and that's going to move the camera in and out. So I can just bring it back and then bring it down. And for now, just placing it right there will be fine. So if I hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view, you can see it doesn't look very good. The lighting looks very boring, and that's because the world is all gray. So let's add in that HDRI that I mentioned at the beginning of the first part of the tutorial. So let's click right over here on the world properties. And if there isn't already a new world, you can click on the new button to add a new world. And then I want to add in the environment texture. So right here next to the color on this yellow dot here, I'm going to click on this, and I don't want to just use a single color. I'm instead going to use an environment texture. And then it's pink because it doesn't actually know what texture it's going to use. So let's click on open to open up an environment texture. And then here is the Phaser Forest 01 1K HDRI. So again, links in the description if you'd like to download this. This is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, and I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So I'm going to click on this and then click on open image. And now you can see we have some really nice realistic lighting on the mushroom. Now I want to make this much darker because it is pretty bright. So I'm going to turn the strength here to just like a 0.2 on the world. And that way it is much darker. So now I want to add some other lights around here. I want to add some rim lights, which are going to light up the edges. And then I also want to add a main light, which will just light up the mushroom. So let's press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to light, and I'm going to add an area light. So I can now press G to grab. We're going to bring this back. I can hit R to rotate. We're just going to rotate this up. I can also press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, and I can rotate this over and bring it over here to the side. And then I can also scale the entire thing up a bit. And then with the light selected, you can click right over here to go to the object data properties. And right here on the shape, I want to change this to rectangle. This way I can drag the X size, and I'm going to make this much longer. And this will be nicer for a rim light because it's going to light more of the edges because it's higher up and down. Now let's turn the power way up. I want to make this much brighter. So I'm going to turn this rim light up to a power of 3000. I think that looks pretty good. And I could also turn up the X size and maybe scale the whole thing down a little bit. And then also right here on this color, I could make this like a blue color, something like that. So now we have this really cool blue light there on the side of the mushroom. And then I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate. I can hit R to rotate, and I can rotate this on the Z axis, and I'm going to rotate that over. And then this This one I'll make a bit darker, so maybe I'll only make this like 1000. That's a bit better. So they're not quite the same brightness. This one is a little bit brighter. And this one over here, I may actually just turn this down maybe to like a 2000. So something like that. So we have those little blue rim lights there on the side of the mushroom. Now I also want to add a main light, so let's do that. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back to solid view. And I can just select one of these lights, and I'll press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I can press Shift D to duplicate. Let's put this over here, and I can rotate it over so it's kind of pointing more at the front. I can also rotate it down a bit and then bring it up a bit so it's a bit higher. And then I'm going to hold down the Z button and go back into the rendered view, and I want to make this much brighter, so I'm just going to play around with the values until I get something that I like. So maybe a 5000 might be just a bit too bright, so maybe like a 3000. And also on the color here, I might make this a bit of a stronger blue color. So something like that. And also right here on the shape, instead of it being a rectangle, I'm going to change it to disc. And this way it's going to be a circular light. And I can also make that size a bit bigger. Now the bloom setting that we turned on does look a little bit strong. So let's make it a bit less strong. So I'm going to go right here to the render properties, and I can open up the bloom here. And I think I will turn the intensity down just a little bit. So maybe like a 0.6 or a 0.7. And also I could turn the radius down a little bit just because it's a bit too big. So something like that is a little bit better. It was just a little bit strong. So I now want to duplicate this mushroom and make a couple more of them. So I can press Shift D to duplicate, and then S to scale and G to grab. And I'm going to put another mushroom kind of back here, maybe rotate it back a little bit. And then I can press Shift D to duplicate, and let's add another one here. Maybe rotate this over and scale this one down a little bit. And then I also want these mushrooms to be kind of rotated over a little bit. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and go to solid view. And I can press the tab key to go to edit mode. And then I actually want to see this in wireframe. So I can hold down the Z button, and let's go over here to the wireframe. So I can now press the A key to deselect everything, and then I can click and drag to box select just the top vertices. And I can rotate this and kind of move it back a little bit so that it's rotating down a little bit. And hold down the Z button, and let's go to the rendered view. So something like that. If I tab to go back to object mode, I think I will rotate this thing over on the Z axis and maybe move it a bit closer to the other mushroom. And then if I select this mushroom, I can do the same thing. So press the tab key to go into edit mode. I can hold down the Z button and go to wireframe, and I can press the A key to deselect everything. Click and drag just to box select those vertices. And this one, I think I'll just rotate over slightly. It will be pretty subtle, but something like that. Go back up into the rendered view, and I can press the tab key to go back to object mode. So just kind of a subtle rotation. And then let's do a similar thing for this one here. So tab to go to edit mode, hold down the Z button, go to wireframe, and I'm actually going to press 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and then A to deselect, click and drag to just box select those vertices, and I can rotate them over. So something like that. And press the tab key to go back to object mode, press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and I might rotate this on the Z axis, maybe also scale it up a little bit. Alright, so that is looking pretty nice. Now I also want to add a depth of field because I just want to be able to focus on the mushrooms, but then I want the background to be blurred, and also other things which are farther away or closer are going to be blurred, and just the mushrooms will be in focus. So to do this, let's click right up here to select the camera. And then right here on the camera settings, I can turn on the depth of field, and let's click on the arrow to open this up. Now we have a focus object, so I'm going to click on the eyedropper, and then I can just select this main mushroom object, and that is going to focus on it. And then I can play around with the f-stop, and that's going to change the amount of blur. So I'm first going to turn the f-stop down to just like a 0.1, and then I can click on this side arrow, and we can just turn it up a bit, and I might turn it up to like a 0.4 or a 0.3, something like that. I think I'll just go with like a 0.4. So now the mushrooms are in focus, but then you can see the background is very blurred, so that looks nice. And so it makes the background less distracting, and you can focus more on the main subject. Now the background is also a little bit too bright, and so I want to make it a bit darker. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go here to Mesh, and I can add a plane. I'm going to hold down the Z button. Let's go back to solid view, and I can press G to grab. I'm going to move the plane over, and then I can rotate the plane on the x-axis, and I can type in 90 and enter to rotate it over by 90 degrees. And then if I go back into the camera view, I can press the S key to scale this, and I can scale it up really big, and I'm just going to make it fit the camera. So now it is fully behind the camera. And then I want to add a transparent material to this, and we'll just make it darker. So I'm going to click right over here on the material properties. Let's click on new to add a new material. And then right here on the surface, I want to click on this principled shader, and I'm going to go way down here, and I'm going to choose the transparent. So it's kind of right down here, the transparent BSDF. So this way it's going to be a bit transparent, and so we can just tell it how transparent we want it to be. Now right now it's fully black, and that's because we're using Blender Eevee, so there's actually some settings you need to turn on to get the transparency to work. So if you open up the settings here on this material, on the blend mode, I just need to change this to alpha hashed, and now the transparency works. So you can see that plane is transparent. So right here we have this color value, and if I turn it down, it's going to get darker and darker. So I want it to be pretty dark, so not that dark, but a little bit brighter, something like that. So it should be pretty dark, so you should still be able to see the background a little bit, but this is going to make the background much less visible, so you're not going to notice it quite as much. And to actually see how this is going to look, I'm going to press the F12 button, and that is going to render the image, and I'm just going to see what this looks like. So that is pretty good. That's kind of what I want. I do want to be able to see kind of a blurred background, so you can kind of get the idea that it is in a forest, but I don't want it to be very distracting. I think I will press the escape key to go out of this, and I'm just going to make this a little bit brighter. And actually you can see that there's quite a bit of noise there with the alpha hashed. So on this blend mode here, I can actually just change this to alpha blend, and this way it's going to work a bit better. So you can see that transparency is much smoother now. So I now want to add a ground plane, and we're going to make it bumpy, and then we're going to be adding a simple procedural dirt material. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go here to mesh, and I'm going to add the UV sphere. Let's press G to grab, move this down. I can also hold down the Z button and go back to solid view, and I'm going to scale this up pretty big, and then I can press the tab key to go into edit mode, and I'm going to hold down the Z button and go to wireframe. So I can press the A key to deselect everything. I can click and drag just to box select the bottom vertices, and I want to delete them. So I can press X to delete, and let's delete the vertices. Let's go back into solid view. I can go into the camera view, and I'm going to press the A key to select everything, and I can scale everything down on the Z axis just to flatten it. And I can also scale the whole thing up and scale it down on the Z axis. And I can also bring the entire thing down on the Z axis. So we're basically just making this large flat ground plane, and we're going to be adding a dirt material to this. So go back to object node, and then using the object context menu, you can shade this smooth. And I think I will bring it down a little bit farther, so something like that. And also, let's reposition the camera real quick. So I can click right here on the camera, and I can go back to the rendered view to actually see how this is looking. And I can press G to grab, and then I can also double tap the R key, and then I can hold down the Shift key, and that'll make my movements more sensitive, and I can rotate that up and maybe bring it down a little bit. So something like that is pretty good. I do think it looks a bit better if the scene is a bit lower, or the camera is a bit lower and you're looking up at the scene. So something like that. Let's press Ctrl S to save the Blender file. All right, so now let's click on this object here, and I first want to make it very bumpy. So to do that, I'm going to click right over here on the modifier properties, and I first want to give this a subdivision surface so that it has a lot more geometry. So let's click on add modifier, and I can add the subdivision surface modifier here under generate. And then on the levels viewport and render, I want to turn these both up to 3 so that it is very subdivided. So now I can click on add modifier, and I'm going to add the displace modifier. We're going to use the displace modifier to make it all bumpy. Now the displace modifier wants a texture, so let's click on new here to add a new texture. And then to add the texture, I can click on this button right here, and this is going to take us over to the texturing tab. Now right here on the type, it's set to image or movie, but instead of using an image or movie from my computer, I instead want to use a procedural noise. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to change this to clouds. And the clouds is basically Blender's procedural noise texture. Now on this depth here, I want to turn this all the way to the max of 30 so that it has much more detail. And then I can also hold down the shift key and drag this size here to change that. And then I'm going to make this a bit smaller, and then I'm going to click right back here to go to the modifier properties, and I can turn this strength down on the displace modifier. I'm just going to turn this way down so it's not quite as bumpy, something like that. And actually I think I'll click right back here to go to the texture properties, and I want to turn the size up a little bit so those bumps are a bit bigger. So I'm now going to be adding a very simple procedural dirt texture. So let's click on the object, and I can click right over here to go to the shading workspace. And I'm going to go into the rendered view by holding down the Z button and moving my mouse up. And let's also press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. And then right over here, I have the shader editor, so I can click on new here to add a new material, and I can just rename this material to dirt. So I'm going to be adding a procedural noise. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, and let's drop the noise texture right down here. And then with the noise texture selected, I can press Ctrl T, and that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler. We enabled the Node Wrangler in the first part of this tutorial series, and so it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping, and I want to use the object coordinates, so let's put the object into the vector, and the object coordinates is going to place the texture on the object more evenly. And then I don't actually need the mapping, so I can select the mapping and press X to delete it. And then I want to preview the noise texture, so I can Control Shift and select the noise texture, and that is again using the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to preview the texture on the object. So I want to make this more detailed, so let's turn the detail all the way to the max of 15. And then I want to add a bit more roughness, so let's turn the roughness up to like a 0.55. So I can now take this factor here, and I want to put it into the normal to give the dirt some bump. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now that's not going to work properly. You can see there's some weird shading issues. It looks really dark and really weird, and it's not bumpy. And that's because we need to convert this black and white data into normal data. So to do that, I can press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a bump node, and let's drop the bump node in between the noise texture and the principled. And then I actually want the factor to be going into the height value, and that way it'll convert the noise texture into normal data that the principled shader can use. So now you can see this looks really bumpy, and it actually looks like dirt. Now it is a bit too strong, so I'm going to turn the strength down to just maybe like a 0.6, so it's a bit less strong. So something like that is pretty good. And then I also want to put this into the base color. So let's take the factor, and I can put that into the base color, but then I don't want it to just be black and white values. I want it to be like brown colors for dirt. So I can press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I can search for the color ramp node, and I can drop the color ramp in between the noise texture and the base color. So now we can change these colors, and that'll actually change the dirt colors. So I'm going to click on this black tab, and I'm going to bring it out a little bit. And then if I click here on the color, I'm going to make this just like a dark brown. Something like that is pretty good. And then let's also click on this white tab here, and I'm going to drag this over a bit so it's a bit more contrasty. And then I can click on this white tab, and I'm going to make this kind of like a light brown. And maybe make this a bit darker because it's a bit too bright. And then I want to add one more color in here. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and click in the middle. That will add another tab. And then this one, I'm going to make kind of like a reddish dark brown. Something like that. Let's press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and there we go. So it's just a very simple procedural dirt material. All right, so let's click right back over here to the layout, and we are almost done with this image, but I do also want to do a little bit of color correction. So to do that, I can click right here on the render properties, and I'm going to scroll down and open up the color management. Now, in the first part of the tutorial series, we set the view transform to filmic and the look to high contrast, but I can also click on the use curves right here and then open this up, and so I can play around with these curves to color correct the image a little bit. So I'm gonna first go to the C here, and I'm gonna bring this up a little bit so that everything's a bit brighter, and then I can also drag a dot here and bring that down a little bit so that things are a bit more contrasty. So if I check mark the use curves, you can see that's the difference. And then I'm going to click on the red here. The R is for red, and I can drag a curve out. So if I make it more into this corner, it's going to be more red, but if I bring it over to this corner, it's going to be less red. So I do want to add a bit more red. It kind of makes the purple and pinkish colors kind of pop out a bit, and I do think it looks nice. Let's also click here on the B for blue, and then I can drag this out a bit and just make everything a little bit more blue, and I do think that looks pretty nice as well. And then if I click here on the G for green, I could just turn this down a little bit, so it's going to get rid of a little bit of the green colors. I don't want to do it too much, but maybe just get rid of a little bit of the green colors. So if I click back and forth on the use nodes here, you can see there it was before and there it is after. So just that little color correction does make it look quite a bit nicer. So that is it. We can now just render and save this image. So I'm going to press Ctrl S, that will save the file, and then you can click on render and render image, or the shortcut key is F12. And this is in Blender Eevee. I'm doing this in Eevee so you can see it rendered really quickly. So to save this final image, I can click right up here on image, and then I can click on save as. And I'm just going to save this as glowingmushrooms.png, and I'll just save this in a folder with my files, and I'll click on save as. Alright, so that is it. That is going to wrap it up for this tutorial on how to create these glowing mushrooms in Blender. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to help support this channel and purchase the tutorial files, you can get that on my Gumroad and my Patreon with the links in the description. And if you'd like to watch another mushroom tutorial, then definitely check out my Magical Mushrooms tutorial series. Link is in the description. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.